Okay, I think we'll kick it off here. So, yeah, welcome everyone that joined us here. My name is Brandon Van Cleve. I'm the Vice President here at Pine Cove Consulting. Um, we are lucky enough to have Doug Levin on with us today, President and Founder of EdTech Strategies. And I'm going to kick it over to him here in just one second. I'm just going to give a brief intro, and then we'll just push it right to Doug. He has some great stuff to show us. So, a few housekeeping things. So, there's a questions option there on your little panel on the GoToWebinar. Any questions that come up that you would like me to share at any point throughout the broadcast, just pop them right in there, and I'll filter them to Doug or whoever should answer them, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So yeah, this is for those of you that don't know Pine Cove. So we're an IT consulting company based in Bozeman, Montana. You can see kind of the map of where the majority of our clients are. We've been in business. This is our 25th year in business. We are K-12 focused. We do some work outside of K-12, but we started this business around K-12, and it still is the core of what we do, and really have become cybersecurity focused. 25 years ago, we certainly weren't cybersecurity focused, but 25 years ago, you probably weren't worried about cybersecurity, and that's why we're all here today. So we've really evolved and really understood that this is something we had to take ownership of to help protect and educate our customers and non-customers. And that's why we do these webinars. I think for those of you that attended other webinars, we try to do these around every 2 or 3 months. We'll have different content that comes out. We do record this, so this is recorded and will be posted on our YouTube page for anyone that misses it or wants to reference it. And we will send that link out at the end of the presentation. So kind of just getting through us, that's who Pine Cove is, and this is kind of our mantra of why we started to produce this content. Basically our mission statement to our customers of why we're having these conversations. And it's basically, we believe your organization has either been attacked, is currently being attacked, or will be attacked by cyber criminals. So our mission is to provide you the knowledge, the vision, and the solutions to secure your critical assets. And so that's a lot of the things that we do for our customers is define what those critical assets are and figure out strategies to protect them. So that's all. You're going to have to listen to me. I'm going to kick it right over to Doug. I'm going to change presenters here, and we'll get started. But again, please, ask questions. Let's make this as engaging as we can, and really appreciate Doug joining us today.
Great. Thank you very much. Brandon, want to confirm that you can see the title slide on my presentation?
Yep, I see it.
All right, terrific. Yeah, I'm really pleased. My thanks to Pine Cove for extending the invitation to allow me to present, I think, on this important topic. As I think you will hear as I go through my presentation, the sort of the orientation that Pine Cove has, that the best way to be thinking about cybersecurity in a K-12 setting, and really any technology-enabled business today, is that of one where you should be presuming breach, presuming attack, and I'm happy to share some context and lessons that I've learned from my work in K-12 cybersecurity that has happened over the last 18 months or so. Just some background on me so you have some context for my comments. I'm based inside the Beltway, as we say, in the Washington, D.C. area. I will note that we're in the midst of a summer thunderstorm, so I'm hopeful that that won't interrupt my connection. But my work has focused primarily on issues of K-12 education policy and technology, and that career has spanned over 25 years. And so I have advocated for more and better use of technology in education. I have done research for the U.S. Department of Education, for foundations, for private organizations, to track the progress of technology's use in education and to study its effectiveness. And more recently, I have focused on issues of privacy and security. And I've done that from a variety of roles. I've served in research organizations and think tanks. I have done some work on behalf of industry. For 5 years, I also served as executive director of the State Educational Technology Directors Association. So I work with technology leadership in each of the state departments of education, advocating for their needs in DC. So I'm bringing sort of a macro view and a bit of a researcher and a policy view to this issue. And a couple of years ago, I began to see more news stories about cybersecurity incidents affecting K-12 schools. There was a spate of breaches that were happening. In fact, the specific attack was associated with the stealing of W-2 forms. These are the IRS forms that your employer sends to you in January and February each year that sort of lists your earnings for the year. And there was a sophisticated attacker who was spoofing the emails of school district superintendents and sending fake emails to business office staff. And essentially, the request went something like, this is an urgent request from the superintendent. Please send me a PDF of all employees' W-2s immediately to my address. My guess is that it's not every day that someone who in the business office might receive that kind of request from a superintendent. And certainly if they got a direct email from their superintendent, they would probably be inclined to respond as quickly as they could. The only problem was that email address, while the label was the superintendent's name, it actually went to an external email address. And a criminal or criminals then turned around and started filing tax returns for school employees and then collecting fake refunds. In many cases, schools did not realize that this had happened until employees started filing their own tax returns, and the IRS, started to thank people for filing the second return of the year, and that kicked off all sorts of investigations. So as I started to see story after story about those sorts of incidents, and in fact, the IRS itself had issued a warning to school districts about those events, I began to wonder, is this a one-off, sort of occurrence, or are schools experiencing more sorts of cybersecurity incidents? Are people targeting schools? Is this happening more frequently? What are they after? And is student information something that they're concerned about? What are the nature of these attacks look like? How are schools responding? Who has this information? As I went looking around, the main takeaway that I got is that, for all we knew about the state of K-12, sort of public school cybersecurity at a macro level, we might as well be having debates about whether the earth was flat or round. People just did not have this information assembled. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people who are tracking data breaches and cybersecurity incidents more broadly. People may be familiar, for instance, with the Verizon data breach report. There's a number of other services that track data breaches. But when they report on education issues in those reports, they're combining public and private schools. They're combining K-12 schools with community colleges and four-year institutions. And from where I sit, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, yes, broadly speaking, that's all the education sector, but colleges and universities are absolutely not the same thing as elementary and secondary schools. And public schools are very different from private schools. Maybe not so much in how they're organized, but certainly the requirements on those schools. And as public schools, there is a sort of a financing system, a policy system that's quite different than the private side. And so in, sort of the absence of being able to find information, I said, maybe I'll start to assemble it myself and see what I might learn. And maybe there's something that I could learn that others would benefit from as a result. And the net result of that work was the publishing of something that I have termed the K-12 Cyber Incident Map. And it is literally a map of the United States. And from 2016 to the present, I have documented public reports of school cybersecurity incidents affecting U.S. public K-12 schools across the country. You may note that each one of those pins, those dots on the map, those are different colors, and those different colors represent different types of incidents. So some incidents are phishing attacks, some are ransomware, some are data breaches, denial of service, or other incidents. And so if you visit the map, you can click on each of those pins and learn a little bit more about each of those incidents that I have become aware of. Now, I should note, and this is important, these are only publicly reported incidents. And so these are, by and large, attacks that have been successful, right? Because if an attack had begun but had been quickly mitigated, it may not have been publicly disclosed. While there are public reporting requirements for data breaches, those vary from state to state, and not in every case are they required to be publicly reported. Or if they are required to be reported, right, that may not be public. So there may be a reporting requirement, but it may not be public. But a number of these incidents don't necessarily meet the threshold of a data breach, right? It may be stealing of money, it may be a disruption of service, it may be a whole variety of things that are not, strictly speaking, a data breach. And so those do not necessarily become public. Based on my conversations with other experts, based on my review of data that has been reported to state attorneys general, in some cases where there are reporting requirements, I may be undercounting the frequency of incidents by 10 or 20 times. And I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers were that large. And so it has become clear to me that this is something that is pretty significant. And at least for me as a student of the K-12 sector and of education and technology policy, I didn't know very much about this. And as a result, I presumed that maybe others didn't know much about it either. Now, also at this website where the map is at k12cybersecurity.com, I've also assembled some K-12 specific resources. So there's a lot of detail about these incidents, video news reports, descriptions of the incidents, indications of sort of repeat incidents experienced by school districts. But I've also assembled what K-12 specific cybersecurity resources I have been able to find. And these are resources that have been produced by the federal government, by state governments, by research organizations and nonprofits. This is not information that is vendor underwritten or vendor sponsored. And I should note that all of this work has been self-funded. This is work that I believe is important and have wanted to share. So it's not sponsored work by anyone. And then about a couple of months ago, I've also started pushing out a newsletter every couple of weeks with news and information on incidents and that have changed over time or have come to light. So what I'm going to be sharing with you then are lessons that I have learned from assembling this unique database of cybersecurity related incidents affecting U.S. K-12 public schools from January 2016 to the present. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about sort of the big three lessons that I've learned from this work. But I'm going to conclude in talking about three ways that school districts can respond. Because what I don't want to do is leave a sense in people's mouths that this is sort of a bad taste, like this is a really tough problem, it feels overwhelming, we're not really sure that we have enough money or expertise or time to respond. And I think that's counterproductive. And so I want to leave us, if you will, on a high note on ways that we can respond. But before that, let's sort of get our hands around what it is that, sort of the state of K-12 cybersecurity in schools based on what I have been able to see. So I would say the first big lesson, really big picture lesson, is that it does appear that cyber incidents are becoming more common in schools. And I think of this as a bit of a good news, bad news story. And I say good news because, as I indicated in my introduction, I've spent my career working and advocating for more and better technology use in schools. More schools are one-to-one, are offering devices to students than ever before. Schools are relying on digital instructional materials. In many cases, state testing is shifting to be computer-based. Students can take courses online. These are all things that many, many people have been working on for years, and there's good reason to be excited about it. And at the same time, as we've been working sort of on the teaching and learning side, more tools are available for administration, right? So for human resources, for facilities, for food service, for managing all of the federal programs, for special education, et cetera. And those are increasingly digitized. And in many cases, they are saving us time and allowing us to provide better services to schools. We hope that it's saving us money. I'm not sure that's always the case, but this is what we've been working for. But as a result, schools are more vulnerable to incidents. And what I have seen in the data that I have collected over the last couple of years is that the pace of incidents is pretty significant. In 2016, I identified 67 incidents around the country, but last year I identified 3 times as many, 218. This year we've already passed, as the beginning of August, we've already passed the number for all of 2016, and we'll see what the first, few months of the school year has in store for us. I don't know that we'll get to 218. I would hope not, but we'll see. On average, I have been finding nearly 3 cyber incidents a week across the country. And that pace has held pretty constant for the whole time that I have been tracking this. And so, every day I am out looking to see what may have happened. And a few times every week, I do find incidents. One of the things that has emerged over time as I've been tracking is that not every incident is happening in a new school district. And so while I have identified, I think the number right now is 353 incidents, there are not that many school districts that I have in my database. A little over 5%, almost 7%, are repeat incidents. And by a repeat incident, I mean a school district has suffered more than one incident since 2016. And, there can be many reasons for why that may happen. It may be bad luck. It may be that the vendors that a school district have chosen have had issues, and so schools have gotten unlucky in that way. I will say in a couple of cases, the repeat incidents that I've seen in school districts suggest maybe that those school districts probably need to be paying more attention to cybersecurity issues and addressing them in their districts. But it's hard to say unless you look at the data, and I've started to do that. But I thought that has been pretty interesting. Of course, there's somewhere north of 15,000 school districts all across the country, so it's still a relatively small proportion of districts that have been affected, but the pace is significant and the pace is increasing. And in some respects, this shouldn't be surprising or particularly alarming. We see data breaches and incidents from the federal government, whether it's the OPM, of Office of Personnel Management breach, the National Security Agency, the Department of Defense, have had issues. We've seen major corporations like Target or Equifax that have had issues. And we actually routinely also see issues that have sprung up with major technology companies, people like Intel or Cisco or Microsoft or Apple. If organizations and institutions like that struggle with keeping their IT equipment secure, it's not surprising that we're going to see issues in schools as well. The second big takeaway that I think is worth people considering is that these incidents can be a big deal. Now, an incident is not an incident on my map, and by that I mean it could be a relatively minor issue. Perhaps a school website was compromised for a couple of hours before school technology staff was able to reassert control over that website. No data may have been at risk in that case, but it may have raised some alarm bells for the community. In other cases, we've seen tens of thousands of student records stolen, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen from school districts. And so, with sort of the variety of attacks that we see, we're seeing a huge variety of motivations. I think it's important to understand why it is that people would be targeting schools in the first place. Because schools may not be the first place that you would think that we have to defend. It's not what the government calls critical infrastructure. It's not the electrical grid. It's not dams. It's not the telephone system. It's not banks, right? I mean, what is it in schools that is so valuable? And I mean, the fact of the matter is, though, that schools do oversee quite a bit of money. In many communities, schools are the largest employer. And they are quite big businesses in their own right, with facilities and transportation and food service. And so there is quite a bit of money that goes through schools. I don't mean to suggest in any way that schools are rich or bursting at the seams, but they do process a lot of money for a lot of people. And so money is absolutely a motivation. In some cases, for people who are interested in stealing money online, schools are just low-hanging fruit. And so they're looking and scanning for weak targets. And when they find one, they will exploit it. And if it works in one place, they will turn and direct their attention to others who might share the same weakness. So we've seen some schools targeted. When schools are targeted for a specific kind of attack that is successful, we've seen copycat attacks spring up. In some cases, in regional networks, right? So in the Atlanta area, there was an attack on the school HR system that intercepted employee payroll. Well, 2 other school districts neighboring to Atlanta were hit within a week. Right. So if attackers are successful, they will just move on and try to find similar targets. We've certainly seen people go after the identities of individuals in schools, whether that's the adults or the students. That is absolutely about money, but with people's identity, they're also able to open other accounts, take out money, and push out information or disinformation in ways that can be harder to trace. And so we've absolutely seen identities being stolen, both of adults, teachers, and school staff, as well as students. Students' identity are particularly valuable, not because they have a lot of money in their name, but because it's unlikely for students to check their credit record and hence get notified of issues with their identity for many years, right? So if you're able to get the identity information of an elementary school student, you may have 10 or 12 years to use that identity for nefarious purposes before you are found out. We've also seen attackers be interested in school IT assets, right? So schools have a lot of computers, a lot of routers, and in many cases, attackers are looking to build um, armies, if you will, of computers that they can turn and attack other people with. Some people call these botnets. So we've seen cases where the interest of attackers is not so much any data or money that schools may have. It's the fact that there's a large number of unsecured assets that they can mobilize at will to the highest bidder. And so in that way, schools become sort of unwitting third parties to attacks on even more important targets. We've seen schools be targeted for sort of political or policy disagreements. In some cases, this has to do with national or even international politics. There was an incident earlier this year where a school website provider was compromised. Their DNS was hijacked. And for a number of hours one day, 800 school websites around the country were broadcasting ISIS propaganda videos. Um, and so again, that's a concern, an issue that goes well beyond data or money. We've also seen sort of more parochial, if you will, policy disagreements. There was a school district in California that was interested in implementing a new grading system. And there was some controversy about the student grading system. Some students' GPA was going to go up, some was going to go down. It was a competitive school district, and so parents and students were obviously quite concerned. And someone associated with the school launched a shadow website that allowed members of the school community to compare their GPA under the two schemes the school board was considering. And so they literally cloned the student information system and posted it online to inform that sort of policy debate that was happening locally. When the school district was able to shut down that shadow website, it popped up again and again in different places. We've seen attempts to disrupt school operations. So it may be that in some cases students or maybe teachers, I doubt it, but perhaps a student wanted to extend their winter break or extend their snow days during a weather event. So we've seen school communications or websites hijacked to confuse people about when schools are opening or closing. We've certainly seen denial of service attacks launched against schools. The most common time that we see that, of course, is during testing season. And that has become sort of an annual challenge that schools face. But that happens sort of locally within school networks as well as against sort of statewide events like statewide testing, usually in the spring of every year. We've seen individuals also target schools because they've had a grudge or a personal relationship go sour, right? So there are people who have been fired from school positions who are upset about it. We've seen incidents where there have been personal relationships that have not worked out, and the breakup maybe is not so smooth, and people are vindictive about that. We have also seen incidents where students have been, expressed displeasure to the school administration or specific teachers. And we've certainly seen many incidents where students themselves have tried to change their grades in the school student information system or even erase things like school lunch debt. And then a number of incidents that we see, I think the only way to chalk it up are because they have been made by mistake. These are most often perpetrated by educators who may be posting sensitive information on public websites or emailing sensitive information, public addresses. We've seen this happen with school board members. These are honest mistakes, but that doesn't mean that they are not significant in and of themselves, right? And so in some cases, these incidents have resulted in criminal charges. They have resulted in people going to jail. We've seen students expelled. We've seen school staff who have lost jobs. So these are, we've seen schools lose money. We've seen school insurance policies pay out. We've seen school insurance policies not pay out, depending on the specifics of the circumstance. So these can be quite a big deal. But I think, the one thing that I would just make sure that people think about in this context is, when we think about cybersecurity and hacking, we always have this vision, or we often have this vision of someone in a dark hoodie, sort of maybe working in an internet cafe, and maybe the Soviet Union, who is, looking to cause harm. And in some cases, absolutely in some cases, there are nefarious criminals who are working to attack schools, and in some cases, they are indeed from overseas. But a large proportion of breaches and incidents are caused or are due to the actions of school insiders, educators, school staff, or students, or by vendors or business partners of schools, right? So, whom sort of sensitive data is shared by those schools. So, it is not the case always that we should be thinking that, the primary or the only threat are these sort of outside malicious hackers, targeting schools. In many cases, these are people and organizations that are known to the school. So then the third big lesson, I would say, that I have seen from the work in compiling the cyber incident map is that the variety of threats and targets that sort of people that are facing schools are large, right? And so we've seen a number of sort of common targets, maybe some things you would think about, but maybe also then some others that you would think less about. And so student information systems, absolutely a target for these sorts of incidents and attacks, but also human resources and payroll systems. I think one of the things that has surprised me maybe the most is that school staff are often a target, and their information is often a target in these incidents. And while it is appropriate and important that we are really laser focused on protecting student data, I was less prepared to see the number of incidents. I did not expect to see the number of incidents affecting the adults who work in schools. So we've seen HR and payroll systems affected, but also district billing and payment systems. So certainly quite a bit of money is contracted out to schools. Some of the largest attacks that I have seen over the last 2.5 years have actually been in the context of school construction, right? So as you might imagine, some of the largest checks that a school system would ever write would be to a construction firm building a new school. Well, in Colorado, there was an instance. Did we lose? Sorry about that. There was an incident in the midst of a school construction. Somebody who was quite knowledgeable and sophisticated fished the school district contracting representative and fooled the bank and misdirected the very large payment to the contractor, and the school district was out several $100,000 as a result. We have seen email accounts often being targeted. So this includes, teacher accounts, student accounts, but I think the most consequential issues have happened with the accounts of school leadership. so superintendent accounts, senior staff. One sort of weak link that we have seen that may not be obvious are school public relations officials, right? So your spokesperson in the school district. Turns out that the email account of that individual is quite valuable in some cases to people because they may have the credentials for social media accounts, for the website. There's a lot of traffic that's sensitive to information about the school in that person's account. And so we've seen, school, public relations officers frequently targeted. We have seen attacks, interestingly, against Internet of Things devices in schools. And so, increasingly everything that we put in a school is internet connected. Your phones, your printers, maybe digital billboards, security cameras, all of that infrastructure, door locks, all of that infrastructure, since it's connected, is a potential point of vulnerability. So routers and Wi-Fi access points have been commonly targeted in a number of these systems. I have been surprised at the number of phone systems that have been affected or targeted in attacks. We've certainly seen security cameras affected. And this is a very interesting point because, most often schools are deploying, security cameras for safety reasons, to have a better sense of who's on campus and if there's an incident, maybe who is involved, so schools can respond more quickly. But it turns out that these devices are notoriously insecure, and if they're not set up correctly, or even in some cases when they are, given how that they're built, they can be accessed by third parties with malicious intent. And so they can hijack those video streams and then post them online or use them to social engineer schools. And then finally, it turns out that school social media accounts and websites are quite popular targets as well. The thing that is particularly notable about school social media accounts, at one level, if you're working in IT in a school district, you're not at some level that worried about it, right? Because it's not connected to any, or shouldn't be connected really to any personally identifiable information of students or teachers. There's no financial information there. It's an inconvenience. But what we have seen, and this is an article that I've linked here that I think is important to highlight, is that because school social media accounts are usually offered for free to schools, there's really not anybody on the other end of the phone that you can call when something goes wrong. You're at the mercy of that free services sort of tech support lines. And there have been a couple of cases where school social media accounts have been compromised, and some pretty heinous or sensationalist content has been posted in the school's name that's ended up getting school administration and school board members in the news in very uncomfortable ways. And schools have been unable to get that content taken down. In some cases, it's taken as long as 40 hours or more to get those incidents taken care of by those sites. So less concerning in some ways in terms of the impact, to the financial stability or personal information of individuals, but a big deal in terms of the reputation of school districts. So let me now sort of pivot to what schools can do to respond. And certainly I can, sort of address any questions about specific incidents or the nature of those sorts of incidents that schools have been dealing with. But let's spend a little bit of time talking about how we can make it better. So I think one thing that's really important to think about is that not all of these cybersecurity risks are equal. And for school IT staff who particularly who are versed in security, they're very familiar with a number of frameworks put out by the federal government and very reputable organizations that help organizations manage and manage cybersecurity risks. And in my looking and review of all of these frameworks, they all seem, quite honestly, they're all quite good, but they all seem, frankly, a little complicated and maybe not on target to the K-12 setting. So this is a framework that has been put out by the AFCEA Cyber Committee in 2013. And I like it for a couple of reasons. One, for its simplicity, but secondly, because it inherently takes into the issues of cost. And so a lot of the issue in managing cybersecurity risk, when you're facing this whole variety of threats, is, well, how are you going to spend your scarce resources of time and expertise and money? And this framework really sort of is focused on two dimensions, right? So the first dimension, the sort of horizontal dimension, is sort of how critical that threat is. You know, if there was a compromise to some data system or some IT asset, how critical is it to, in this case, you know, a school's functioning? You know, is it sort of a low risk if the digital bulletin board is compromised, it's only in the school? Or, you know, is it a high risk if it's, you know, staff financial information or student, you know, special education records, right? Or maybe, you know, it's Google Apps for Education, and you would lose, you know, you lose your internet connection and you lose that for a couple of weeks, and instruction would be hard to deliver, right? So those are sort of critical functions, and there are others that are sort of less critical. But then the threats are also different types of threats, right? There's unsophisticated threats, right? Many of these issues are sort of low-level threats. A number of them are what I would call sophisticated, right? And so, you know, people talk about sort of nation-state actors in 0 days. Well, those are super sophisticated threats done by people who are highly sophisticated with you know, tools that can compromise governments or major corporations, right? And so those are going to be pretty hard for any organization, much less schools, to deal with. So, you know, the first thing really is that I think schools need to triage their cybersecurity risks. And for the unsophisticated risks, really, frankly, whether they are sort of low risk, I mean, sort of low criticality, or certainly for high criticality, you know, the unsophisticated risks, the ones that we understand, the ones that we have tools that work for, you know, we really need to just take ownership over those. And we can implement a comprehensive set of sort of baseline security controls. You know, but in terms of sophisticated threats, you know, there's this judgment that we have, and it's a bit of a cost-benefit judgment. When you've got people who can compromise your system, no matter what you do, you have to decide what you're going to try and protect. And you need to protect those functions that are most critical. You need to protect that student information, you know, the financial accounts of the school, the staff information. And so that's worth investing then in specialized tools, right, and advanced controls, right? And so these might be more inconvenient for school staff. These may cost the school district more money, right? But these are the things that if something goes wrong, it would be really bad. But at some point, you're not going to be able to protect against all risks, and you're just going to have to accept that risk, right? And you know, everything, you know, about schools, even in serving students, there's always some degree of risk. Something could happen. A student could get sick. There could be a security incident. Adults could behave badly in the school. There are risks, and we just have policies and procedures and things like insurance in place to help manage that risk. And I think, as Brandon indicated again at the beginning of the webinar, it's not a question about whether or not schools are being targeted. It's about how they respond. And so this framework, I think, is really helpful, and I think simple way to explain, I think, in a way that's meaningful, how schools can respond. Now, about those sort of common sense baseline controls, there's a variety of lists that exist that are terrific, that can help school IT staff respond to cybersecurity threats. CIS has the top 20 list. There's a number of other lists that are out there that are quite good. But based on what I have seen from data in assembling a K-12 cyber incident map, I see four things that would make a huge difference. And I might argue that 80 to 90% of all of the incidents that I've identified would not have been a big deal or not even happened if these four things were implemented well in schools. The first is having a backup strategy. So when schools are affected with malware or ransomware or some other disruption, one easy response is just to wipe those machines and reinstall them. In a number of cases where schools have really gotten into trouble with ransomware or malware, they have not been able to respond. In some cases, in some ransomware incidents, they have chosen to pay thousands of dollars to extortionists. We've also seen school districts that have been offline and lost, years of data or weeks of school time, school access to IT assets because they didn't have backup. And the only note that I would make, and for those who work in IT know this well, sort of a backup that has not been tested is really a fantasy. Those backups need to be tested, and there needs to be some offsite backup for those files as well, so they don't get affected by anything that gets nasty that gets into your systems. In some cases, we've seen schools have issues with out-of-date or legacy software, and so it's important to install those security patches when those are available. There are websites and tools that allow attackers to search for certain sort of software and unsecured ports online. And if you've not patched your systems, there will be people looking to exploit them if exploits exist. A big issue that I have seen is this third one. It has to do with sort of user authentication and password management. So password management is a bugaboo for schools. There's no question. There's so many services that people have and need to get to. They have logins. Students have login information. But we've seen a lot of incidents where passwords have been shared and they get exposed to people who shouldn't have access to them. We've seen passwords written on sticky notes and stuff, left next to computers that people have gotten. We've seen passwords still remaining active after staff have been fired or let go. And we've seen poor passwords where passwords have been guessed. And we see passwords reused, right? So if the poor public relations person in the school district's account has been compromised, it turns out that that same password also works for all the social media accounts and the website, et cetera, et cetera. So helping educate users on what a good password is and helping them to manage those passwords in ways that reduce password reuse and password sharing would be really powerful. It also is a huge, being able to implement a second factor authentication of any type would go a huge way to helping schools not fall victim to phishing attacks, which is one of the more common attacks that we've seen against schools. And then finally, anything that schools can do to build training and awareness among end users around teachers and students, to build some skepticism into downloading and installing software or to using online services or to clicking on links or forwarding and responding to email. This is sort of bread and butter cybersecurity work, but it's pretty clear that people routinely continue to fall for relatively unsophisticated attacks. And while we can try to build IT tools and systems that prevent these things from happening, then we start dealing with false positives and the sort of diminishing returns. At the end of the day, we really do need a focus on training and awareness. In many respects, I think of this almost as a health issue. It's like everybody needs to get vaccinated because if one person gets sick, then sort of the whole community can get affected by it. And it's the same thing with cybersecurity issues. And then the third and final piece of advice I would give is particularly for IT staff to try to engage district management and leadership in these issues. There's no question that IT has a really important role. They probably have the lead role in dealing with these issues, but we're going to keep dealing with these issues and being challenged with them until leadership, meaning superintendent and in some cases school board, are also engaged in these topics. So I think it is the responsibility of school district leadership to define acceptable risks. So in that framework that I presented, school district leadership should be on board about what it is that is really the most critical functions that need the protection and where resources should be spent to protect them. They should be involved in defining the roles and responsibilities for teachers and staff and for students in terms of appropriate behavior and when to flag incidents and how to respond to challenges. I do believe it is a job of school district leadership to model good security behavior. I understand how challenging that may be, but it is really critical because in many cases they are specifically targeted as well. Certainly it's leadership's responsibility to allocate budget, both for baseline controls and the advanced controls. It is important for IT to play a role in that, of course, but at the end of the day, the school district needs to allocate enough money to defend, and manage these risks. And then for what they're not defending, right, it's important to get insurance, right, and to insure against maybe the absence of security controls or when they fail. And so nothing is perfect, and there's no guarantees. And so it's quite possible that you would see a failure as well. And then when there's a failure, leadership needs to be engaged with incident response. And the best time to develop those incident response plans are, of course, before an incident happens. And we've seen incidents that have been, frankly, relatively minor spin out of control because of poor incident response. And if school leadership doesn't think that these issues really speak to them, once there's an incident and parents and the media are calling them, they may likely change their tune. So it is best to be proactive. So to the extent that we can engage leadership, we're really going to be in a much better place. And then finally, I just want to close then with just offering some additional resources. So K-12 cybersecure.com is now the site where I have published all of the cybersecurity resources that I have that are K-12 specific, including the cyber incident map, which is always kept up to date. I now publish a semi-monthly newsletter that has sort of news and information that's relevant to K-12 cybersecurity issues. And of course, I'd be delighted to follow up with anyone directly if there may be any way that I can help or to answer any questions about K-12 cybersecurity issues, and my contact information is published there on the screen. So I guess with that, I will close and turn it back over to Brandon. I'm certainly happy to address any questions or hear any comments that anyone may have.
That's great. Thanks for that information. That was excellent. I have one question that I probably could answer, but I'll let you answer it as well after. But this is from Chris. I'd love to share this presentation, some of the highlights of the presentation with K-12 technology support people here in Illinois. What is the best way? From the Pine Cove side, we'll be sending you this recording. So since you attended, we'll be sending you that recording. So that's an easy way. But also, Doug has his information right up here on the screen, and you're more than welcome to reach out to him for that information. So by all means. And just Chris gave some great feedback, awesome presentation. So thanks for the feedback to Doug. And the one thing I just kind of have a comment just on my side, and particularly to the leadership slide at the end. I agree with that wholeheartedly, and to the fact of I use this comment all the time is, we hear from leadership inside of school districts or even business. When we ask them how their cybersecurity practice is and how confident they feel, and they many times just defer it to their IT staff. And the point I try to make is, if you were to have some type of public breach, who's the newspaper or the school board or the community going to point the finger at? It's not going to be the IT person. They're going to point to you and say, superintendent or principal or whoever that is, how did you let this happen to our kids? And so I think that kind of helps people understand, oh, wow, this really is my problem as the leader of the school district. So I think that's really important for them to understand, to get involved and be a part of the process of creating a solution for this. So yeah, great information there. And I think, for our customers that are on here or people that have worked with us, I think that matrix that you showed, and Doug, maybe you could slide back to that real quick. Perfect. This really, I love this slide because I think it helps understand there's some things we have to understand, these highly sophisticated attacks, we can do the best we can to avoid them, but let's make the easy attacks much more difficult to happen. So, a lot of these attacks are just looking for holes. And when they find that hole, it's not personal to you. You just have a hole in your system that they're going to exploit. And they're going to see how far they can take it and how big of an entity you are and how valuable of a target you are. We want to help our customers close those gaps. And between the yellow and the green, look at how you're doing things currently and how we can help, make that a solid kind of wall and a layered wall of protection. So that's a great slide, Doug. That was a great takeaway for me. Let's see. I think we're done with questions, Doug. If you have anything else, obviously you can jump in. But again, I really appreciate the time and energy and syncing up with us. We've obviously been following you from afar because really the first person or entity that we've found focusing on cybersecurity in K-12 specifically. So we love the content, and we really appreciate you coming on and talking to our audience.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and obviously I care deeply about these issues, and I'm happy to work with anyone who shares sort of the common cause just to help schools, begin to manage these risks. I mean, they are what they are. I think with the increased use of technology in education, which we have been working for and which should be a positive thing, and it is a positive thing, risks come, and there are no 100% guarantees in this world. I mean, you shouldn't ever believe someone who tells you that their system is 100% secure. There are, these are risks that we have to manage. But if we're smart together and we sort of work together, I think we're going to be a much better place. And we just need to surface this conversation, bring leadership into it, and then just start to, this is just going to be part of doing business of schools, but we have to make this transition and start to, surface this conversation and raise its importance. And unfortunately, we're going to just keep seeing incidents crop up they're going to push this issue. And so, it's so much better to be prepared for them and to be able to respond to them when they do crop up, because the last place you want to be is unprepared. It really can be quite a bad day for you if that's your situation.
That's great. Well, thanks I guess we can close on that. But again, thanks for everyone that attended. Keep in mind that the recording will be sent to you probably within the next 24 hours. And if there's any additional feedback or any additional information that you need from us or to Doug, we'll make sure you have that information. So thanks again to everyone for joining, and we'll see you on our next webinar.